The sovereign colonies are the predecessors to the Earth government, known in the games as EarthGov. The colonies would govern over humanity until the 24th century, where they showed their true colors and had made the ultimate sacrifice to store an ancient evil, even if that would mean losing the war against the Earth Rebellion, who would later become the organization EarthGov. In this video we'll be given an overhaul of the sovereign colonies and the succession wars, and their eventual and heroic sacrifice to put a serious effort into making sure that this ancient enemy would not reawaken. For if it did, it would rain hellfire down upon all life within the known galaxy, and would never cease until all forms of life were dominated and made whole. With tensions rising between the two largest nations, the United States of America and Russia, or as they were known as the Soviet Union, the Cold War had begun. In our world, the Cold War was an information war and focused around proxy wars, which is a war instigated by a major power which does not itself become involved. In the Dead Space universe, however, it was something completely different. It was in fact an actual war between two superpowers. However, it started much later, happening sometime just after the 21st century had concluded. Near the end of the war between the two superpowers, America and Russia would have a couple of battles against each other. The first would be known as the Battle of the Bering Sea. As the conflict unfolded, an American freighter illegally entered Russian territory in the Kara Sea, which would result in the crew of the ship becoming captured and held hostage by Soviet forces. The American response would plunge the US into an engagement that would be known as the Second Battle of Bering Sea. The end result and victorious side to both battles are shrouded in mystery, as there are no records of who won the conflict. However, one thing is for certain, and that is that the war had ended shortly after the engagement. Now, this is just a theory, but I am assuming that both superpowers destroyed each other to the point where they came together and put a peace treaty to have talks about becoming a single entity, one that would put an end to human conflicts once and for all. While these talks were proceeding, the first space vessels would be tested and shortly after launched into space. Another concern for the world leaders was the state of the environment on Earth, as environmental catastrophes had been wreaking havoc on humanity, with cities like New York and Venice becoming submerged under the weight of the oceans, along with the inland cities and towns becoming overpopulated with refugees, which would create even more pollution, effectively destroying the environment even more. The warmer seas allowed for more powerful storms to form in, which the infamous Trinity hurricanes are the most destructive, submerging the Mississippi Delta and surrounding areas under the Gulf of Mexico. Mankind was truly feeling the wrath of Mother Nature, or perhaps an alternative force was at play here. The disasters had created a catastrophic loss in economy, as crucial economy hubs such as New York City, Hong Kong, and other cities in the world are being swept away by water to considerable demographic changes in national population layouts. This had prompted the world leaders to join forces and to announce the creation of a unified government known only as the Sovereign Colonies. The sovereign colonies would begin expanding into space to colonize other worlds to combat their economic and population struggles on Earth. However, their space travel would be limited, as shockpoint drives hadn't been invented at that time. Traveling through space would cost large investments of money and materials. The constant problems with resource shortages due to the environmental epidemic would also limit the ability to expand and support the growing population of humanity. Indeed, it would feel as if humanity was destined to die out and become like the dinosaurs. However hard it was, the sovereign colonies persevered and continued their struggles into the following century, where something unexpected would be found. Back on Earth in 2214, the sovereign colonies would discover the black marker at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and would have it transported to an ocean station to be studied by none other than Michael Altman, which would eventually cause the workers to begin going crazy, sparking the first of many necromorph outbreaks, bleeding into the events of Dead Space Martyr. The black marker would be lost thanks to Altman, which was a devastating loss for the colonies, as research into the marker was theorized as giving humanity near limitless energy, and the resource-starved populations in known sovereign territories would become susceptible to manipulation by secessionists, who would seek to form a new order or government to overthrow the sovereign colonies. Hostilities steadily increased, transforming from simple riots into a full rebellion that resulted in open war. This would be known as the Secession Wars. Not much is known about how long the war had gone on for. However, in the events of Dead Space Catalyst, the book references the Earth Rebellion and the scaf division of the sovereign colonies. So from that we could say that the conflict began somewhere around 2230. However, that is just my speculation, and that has not been confirmed by anyone yet. The war would consume men and precious resources at a steady pace and would steadily consume the ranks of trained legionnaires, eventually forcing the colonies to rely on conscripted soldiers. By 2311, the sovereign colonies were in a critical situation, with both public support and the ability to wage war dwindling. They would gather intelligence and research about the black marker in an attempt to gain any leverage on the secessionists that they could, and they would be successful, creating 3 red markers and sending them, along with research teams, to colonies across the galaxy. Admiral Marjorie Graves would receive a transmission from one of the researchers requesting a rescue effort to Aegis 7 immediately. However, due to the location being kept secret, this kinda surprised her. However, once they had arrived, the research team had been slaughtered, and the red marker stood on top a pedestal. Regardless of the many questions of what had happened, this event would lead them into discovering the master signal, which they would soon use Ptolemy's station to track the signal back to its source, back to Tau Volantis. Once they had arrived at the planet of ice and snow, Dr. Earl Serrano spearheaded the expedition to the planet's surface in hopes of recovering artifacts and new resources to help turn the tide of the war. During the expedition, the excavation of alien artifacts and the markers that resided beneath the planet's surface began to affect the crews. Eventually, the growing dementia and deaths caused by the necromorphs encountered on the planet overwhelmed the expedition. In 2314, Scenario 5, a first contact situation would be authorized by the Sovereign Colonies Council after discovering what the alien machine within the alien city does and what happened to the natives who built it. They discovered what the properties of the markers were and the end game to them. The outbreak on Tau Volantis was described as extinction level. Extreme containment procedures would be mandatory. All personnel participating in, associated with, or with knowledge of the outbreak site would need to be destroyed. All locations connected to said personnel would need to be destroyed also. If destruction is impossible, permanent containment would be required. All the personnel were killed. Some groups had fled into the blizzards to escape, holding out in some of the structures until their unfortunate demise. No one would be able to return to Earth to tell them of what they had found, making the ultimate sacrifice for the good of all mankind. Preserving life, even if that would mean preserving the lives of the rebels, would be more important to them than to see all life be snuffed out by the necromorph threat. The last few pockets of the sovereign colonies would slowly crumble. Either they would defect, surrender, or lose what little they had left, and the new order would become the organization known as EarthGov. The contrast between the opposing sides is that EarthGov would rather use civilians like cattle, using outbreaks to research the markers' capabilities, exposing them to markers in an effort to gaining that raw, unrelentless power, even if that means that they would be playing with fire. However, when it comes to the sovereign colonies, they had completed what they deemed to be the necessary evil in order to preserve life and security for future generations, even if that meant they wouldn't be around to see it. Which, I don't know about you, but that has to be the most heroic act in Dead Space history. Godspeed, sir. No other faction will have come close to achieving that level of status. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then give the video a like rating. Comment something for me to read later on, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you're new here, then sign up to join the British Alliance today by subscribing and ringing the notification bell for future updates, and I will see all of you on the front lines, and have a good one.